On air is Understandable Politics. We continue the program cycle. Time has driven them out. Next up, the United States of America. Democrats leave the White House with a bang, having lost the election. Americans are tired of a whole heap of problems. Inflation, the migration crisis, colossal expenses on Ukraine, corruption scandals of the presidential family. Many internal problems not only remain unsolved, but have significantly worsened over the past 4 years. Americans are not just packing their bags. Their defeat is called the collapse of the party and the decline of its brand. Let's analyze the key points. What is the reason for Biden's campaign failure? In short, they played politics and lost touch with the people. They ignored reality, overlooked the difficulties faced by the majority of Americans.
Migration, rising credit rates, violence, drugs, all these pressing issues of modern American society were deliberately pushed to the background by Democratic political strategists and candidates. Kamala and co. traveled during the campaign in their own illusory world with their purely fantasy agenda: gender, racial, green, Ukrainian, inclusive. Anything but what interests most Americans. In general, they were terribly distant from the people, poorly understood the society they appealed to, and naively relied on for support.
In short, your expectations are your problems, and instead of adequately responding to societal demands, they paid the price. Americans did not forgive such indifference.
Harris and Biden were interested in what they thought should interest all Americans, like protecting rights of sexual and gender minorities they were interested in protecting women's rights to abortion. And also quite an invented problem at the moment. They pushed an agenda important primarily to their circle, which they themselves created. They pushed the agenda within their illusion that all of America consists of migrants, homosexuals, and transgender people. And this is their main audience, the absolute majority.
The lack of meaning coincided with the elementary inadequacy of the American president, who often couldn't string 2 sentences together. Americans saw this on TV day after day. He mumbled, stumbled, mixed up names and dates, didn't know where he was, and couldn't find the exit. When your president becomes a global meme, a hero of jokes, and a master of awkward situations, the strategy called Saving Private Biden was doomed to fail. The way Democrats built their campaign, experts call it a political farce, a blatant disrespect to the American voter.
I believe my experience as president, my leadership in the world, our vision for America's future, all deserved a second term. But nothing can stand in the way of saving our democracy. This includes personal ambitions, so I decided the best way forward is to pass the baton to a new generation. The best way to unite our nation.
Biden left the race early. Harris was essentially appointed as his successor, who wasn't far from her older colleague.
Backroom intrigues and the subsequent bureaucratic, unopposed appointment of Harris as the presidential candidate, without any primaries or even a semblance of real discussion at the Democratic Party convention. Public conversations Harris had with herself, or rather, her antics with her double. Undoubtedly, all these unsuccessful electoral tricks symbolized complete and unmasked disrespect for voters. And not just to consistent Trump supporters, whom the aggressive old man Biden, in his last meaningless and ineffective fit of political rage, called trash.
American media unanimously reported that Joe was consumed by his entourage and he had to give way to his vice president.
The whole point is that Biden becomes a lame duck voluntarily. Before Biden, no sitting president had withdrawn from the re-election race after officially announcing their candidacy, active campaigning, and securing the necessary number of delegates for nomination.
Another Democratic bet didn't work, taking down Trump. Field competitors from Pocket Media wanted to throw him out of the race, as they did last time, creating a digital gulag, blocking Trump's accounts and his supporters, and interrupting Biden's speech. The censorship machine failed the current president, this time on live broadcast.
Unlike previous elections, there was one social network banned in Russia, Twitter X, owned by Trump's close ally Elon Musk. And there, of course, Trump received full support in terms of spreading his messages, algorithms, and everything else. So, we can say that the digital containment policy used by Democrats before didn't work in this election.
Covering up their mistakes and failures with anti-Trumpism didn't work, and common sense among people proved stronger than the artificially created fear of an experienced businessman. Even Hollywood stars, actively used by Democrats, didn't help. Major American press acknowledged the obvious even before the elections. Joe Biden leaves his successor a world plunged into chaos.
Mistakes in the current president's foreign policy led to the largest decline in U.S. influence since the 1930s, writes the newspaper. Dispersing this looming storm will be difficult and dangerous, concludes the Wall Street Journal.
Ruining the world in 4 years, Biden undermined security across the planet. Such a verdict on the Democrats' rule was given by the Telegraph. And readers added fuel to the fire, calling the presidential term an outrageous catastrophe.
Joe Biden became the worst president in our memory. Biden is the worst president in history. As soon as he opens his mouth, lies pour out. Joe Biden ruined the world. That's his entire legacy, period. They wrote,
the disgraceful retreat of Americans from Afghanistan is called Biden's most destructive decision.
the most destructive decision by Biden, according to the Wall Street Journal, was the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan. In the newspaper's opinion, in the wake of this step, trust in the American containment system collapsed.
After that war, a cruel joke was born. Washington spent $1 trillion, 5,000 American soldiers' lives, and 20 years to replace the Taliban regime with the Taliban.
Americans left behind equipment worth $85 billion and over 10,000 people who worked with the Occupation Administration. These images went around the world. American planes hurriedly leave Afghanistan, abandoning their allies to their fate. People cling to the landing gear, dooming themselves to suicide, just to avoid staying in a country where another power is coming.
Another legacy is the conflict in the Middle East. It was with U.S. support that Israel decided to launch a full-scale military operation in the Gaza Strip. The civilian death toll is up to 30,000 people.
Biden's opponents noted that Trump left the White House without a single major war behind him. Biden not only got involved in the Middle East and Ukraine, but also caused a huge societal split over Palestine. The U.S. literally split in half. Those who support Tel Aviv's actions and those who oppose the war. The latter are harassed and expelled from jobs and universities.
Americans have already spent $150 billion on the war in Ukraine, pushing the planet to the brink of World War III. Tens of thousands of American mercenaries, calls to continue the conflict, and of course the famous words of Senator Lindsey Graham, who traveled on behalf of the American president to Kyiv in March 2023.
Russians are dying. We've never spent money so successfully. This is the best investment the U.S. has ever made.
The topic of Ukraine was Joe Biden's last refuge. He oversaw this direction since 2014. So now we are witnessing his personal failure, journalists say.
For American presidents, it's very important to have a political legacy. For example, Clinton is remembered for economic successes. Bush is remembered as the one who fought terrorism, while Biden's legacy is characterized by high inflation and rampant crime, with America divided along ideological, racial, and gender lines. The presidency of the 46th head of the White House will also be remembered for the failed withdrawal from Afghanistan and the ruins in the Middle East.
And even after losing the election, Joe managed to sign 3 aid packages for Ukraine a month before Trump's inauguration and proposed allocating another $26 billion in 2025.
Biden's allies' huge failure is considered the visit of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan in August 2022. It is believed that such disregard for China and its demands is a direct setup for future regional problems.
This fragment encapsulates Biden's actions in the American economy. Inflation reached its historical peak of 9%, dragging down economic growth by 0.6% GDP. Add to this the national debt. It reached a record level.
By the end of June 2024, the federal debt grew to $35 trillion and continues to increase by $1 trillion every 100 days. Already, the U.S. spends over $1 trillion annually on interest payments, exceeding their defense spending, one of the main items of the federal budget.
And this despite the fact that Americans have been receiving bonuses for their economy since the start of the war in Ukraine. Gas to Europe increased by 54%. Over 100 German companies moved their production to the U.S. But there's a saying, they bit off more than they could chew.
The increase in American gas supplies to the EU leads to rising prices in the domestic market. Over the next decades, the costs of the American industrial complex will increase by $125 billion.
And the gasoline crisis in 2022. At one point, due to rising oil prices, the cost of a gallon of fuel, almost 4 liters, reached $10. Biden's fresh legacy is the murder of United Healthcare Insurance Company head Brian Thompson. The perpetrator was called the American Robin Hood and a real hero.
The reason for such a response is the strong dissatisfaction, if not rage, of many Americans with how health insurance companies and the healthcare system in the U.S. work. Insurers' incomes are growing, and this is against the backdrop of numerous refusals to pay clients' treatment expenses.
The reason for the reaction is simple. Such insurance companies use numerous loopholes to reduce payouts to Americans and limit access to free medications. So, having paid for expensive insurance, you might end up with nothing.
The U.S. Border and Customs Service records 10,000 illegal border crossings per day. In border states like Arizona and Texas, the number reaches up to 15,000 entries a day.
According to the Migration Policy Institute, from 2021 to 2023, 6,300,000 people tried to enter the country illegally. Meanwhile, 2,400,000 of them were not deported, but remained in the U.S. until their fate was decided. Additionally, American politicians and media admit that hundreds of thousands of people might have slipped past exhausted border guards.
The illegal migration flow in the United States under the Biden administration became unprecedented in U.S. history. Naturally, this is the main weakness, and this is one of the key parts of Donald Trump's campaign. And most interestingly, in the Biden administration, Kamala Harris was responsible for migration policy and the wall policy. This is her personal failure.
At the peak of the American migration crisis, events in Texas. In December 2023, American border guards detained 300,000 refugees. Among them were escapees from Latin America and the Middle East.
The Biden administration's reluctance to address migration issues in the South sparked protests in Texas, where discussions about secession from the U.S. began. The local governor refused to listen to the central government and closed the borders, defying the White House's statements.
The nearly uncontrolled influx of migrants, most of whom remain in the country illegally, has led to a rise in crime and drug trafficking.
More Americans are dying from fentanyl overdoses. One consequence of the migration crisis and American freedom is entire neighborhoods in U.S. cities filled with walking dead, places ordinary citizens should avoid. American media reports that the idea to ignore migrant flows came from Vice President Kamala Harris. The logic is simple. The people of color arriving in the U.S. traditionally vote for Democrats. That's why many were quickly registered and given documents in just a couple of months.
This strategy wasn't enough, and the mobilization failed because these illegal migrants didn't rush to support or organize numerous rallies to pressure American society. Firstly, it would have objectively caused protests. Secondly, migrants aren't interested in this. They don't need it.
Biden's main personal failure is his beloved son, Hunter. It all started before his presidency, and of course with Ukraine. In 2016, at Biden's personal request, Prosecutor General Shokin, who was investigating the oil and gas company Burisma Holdings, where Hunter worked, was fired.
After the Euromaidan, Hunter Biden joined the board of directors of Burisma. While receiving $50,000 monthly, he used cocaine and hired prostitutes. Additionally, they found a connection to his father. Joe also benefited from Ukraine.
The Hunter Biden story dealt a significant reputational blow to the entire Biden family. Yes, because it was a colossal corruption scandal. Using political influence to solve family issues, earn money, and receive bribes in Ukraine, Romania, Mexico, China, and many other countries where Hunter Biden was active. And he's not the only one. For example, there's James Biden, his uncle, Joe Biden's younger brother, who also earned a lot of money dishonestly. Plus all the scandals related to drugs and prostitution. Hunter Biden's reckless lifestyle led to 2 criminal cases. One verdict has been announced, the other hasn't. In the end, Biden had to pardon his son.
And there's more. Hunter owned illegal firearms. He filmed pornographic videos with minors. He also worked as a lobbyist using his father's connections. Additionally, he didn't pay millions in taxes to the state treasury. During the time his father was vice president and running for president,
Bingo is extremely popular among American retirees. It's a form of lottery, and Joe has completed the bingo of an American president. Start a war? Check. Create an internal crisis? Check. Economic downturn in the country? Check. World on the brink of chaos? Check. And he pardoned his son, who faced 2 life sentences right before the trial. It seems Joe can retire peacefully, unlike his successor, who now has to deal with all this. Goodbye.